Hello and good day. This is the Bible Bard. The place we're at today is this. We are looking at a concept of the Bible which in English is translated, the word is translated as acknowledge, acknowledged or acknowledging God. For example, the text reads, quote, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths," end quote. Proverbs 3, verse 6. That's from the English Standard Version. In the New Testament, we have instances like this. These are promises. Quote, God is speaking and says, "Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven." That's Matthew 10:32 from the NIV. That's Jesus speaking. In English, the word acknowledge often simply means to recognize someone's presence, influence, or existence. But in the English translation of the Bible, the word acknowledge is not used merely to indicate an assent. Instead, because of the meaning of the Hebrew and Greek words the translations are trying to convey, the word acknowledge means something more. It means integrating the person of God into every aspect of our lives. Lesson. As listeners to this podcast know, the Bible Bard discusses texts from the Bible literature that are clear and easy to understand by anyone because there is little difference between the meaning in the original languages and that in the English translations. Where ambiguity does exist as literature, the context helps us to understand the intended meaning of any passage. But with this idea of acknowledging God, we have a problem. The original languages express this concept through several related verbs like the Hebrew yada and the Greek homologio that include the idea of knowing, recognizing, confessing, identifying with, and responding to God. These are all concepts embedded in the original language. But if we look at the concept being translated as acknowledge, we move from the simple meaning of acknowledge in English, and in the context, we see the concept of integrating the person of God into every aspect of our lives. Let's look inductively at a couple more passages for clarity. Here's one, quote, "I acknowledge my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgression to the Lord," end quote. "And you forgave the guilt of my sin," end quote. That's from Psalm 32:5, the NIV. God is speaking and says in the next verse, quote, "You who are far away, hear what I have done. You who are near, acknowledge my power," end quote. That's from Isaiah 33:13 from the NIV. In the next sample text, Jesus is speaking and says, quote, "I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God," end quote. That's Luke 12, verse 8, NIV. In each sample text that we're providing, the meaning of the context expands the idea of the English word acknowledgement in the concept of a fully integrating God's person into one's life. Discussion. So we see in the translation of the word acknowledge an impact that includes the following. First, knowing who God is according to the literature of the Bible. That's part of acknowledging God. Number two, walking with God. This metaphor idea of walking along with someone is an accord, a unity with someone, and you're going in the same direction. In every part of human life, God is present with us in our life. This is also part of the translated words of the original language to acknowledge. Then the third one we see is agreeing or aligning with God about his views of what is important in human life. That's part of acknowledging God. And then the fifth, publicly identifying yourself with Christ. This idea that one acknowledges Christ before people is part of this, and that comes through very clearly in the text. And then finally, understanding Christ acknowledges those who acknowledge him. Conceptually, acknowledgement of God begins with recognizing who God is, matures into daily following God and fellowshipping with him, and obedience expresses itself through honest confession and public allegiance, and culminates in God's own acknowledgement of the believer as his. Summary. The difficulty for those who read the Bible in translation is remembering that a word-for-word correspondence between languages is often not possible. Translations rely on an understanding of the concept or the idea presented in the original language, and then finding an acceptable way in translation to balance lexical consistency with readability and contextual meaning. The issue for believers is that every step away from the literal wording of the original text requires more conceptual interpretation by the translator, which brings the translator's own religious preconceptions into the final text. At least that's the threat. In this view, the translator must first decide what the text means and then translate that in interpretation into the English or the target language. Therefore, conceptual translations increase the possibility that theological or cultural assumptions may begin to shape what we get in the final translation. This fear that those have of gradual or perceptually moving away from the wording of the original biblical text to something else is one reason the Bible Bard attempts to ignore for discussion Bible passages that are controversial. The Bible Bard focuses in the podcast on biblical texts about which there is little translational or theological controversy between the original text and the translated version. That's why we do this podcast the way we do. In fact, when we limit our discussion to the clearest correspondence between the text in the original language and the text in the translated version, as much as we can, we provide the best understanding of what the Bible teaches. And we can be most confident that the Bible's revelation of who God is and who human beings are is what the author intended. And that's the way the Bible Bard works. Conclusion: a bard is a storyteller who recites traditional texts in the past associated with a particular oral tradition, and I'm here to recite and to amplify what the literature of the Bible says. We're talking about the ideas and the concepts the Bible presents, because most people have never engaged with biblical thought. Make up your own mind whether you agree or disagree with the Bible's pronouncements. Also, go to www.biblebard.org to download a transcript, listen to another episode from the archive, or get links to other materials and information. Remember, the Bible Bard English podcast is translated into other languages, including Spanish, Hindi, Nepali, Urdu, Swahili, Chigua, and Bengali. And we've started Punjabi. We are looking for more local translators. And if you could help us with that, let us know. Support the Bible Bard at the website. Click the Donate tab and make a contribution. Send the Bible Bard any question or remarks you care to offer to BibleBardUS@gmail.com. We're glad to hear from you. And connections. I thank you in advance for following, subscribing to, sharing, and commenting on Bible Bard content from our many platforms. The Bible Bard is available as an audio podcast on some platforms and also available in video form on others. Until next time, this is the Bible Bard.